Out past the cottonwoods, where dusk settles like a slow-falling curtain, rancher Eli Mercer thought he'd seen just about everything a hard western life could throw at a man. But that evening, as 3 tiny foals stopped dead at the barn door, refusing to take a single step inside, he felt a strange tug in his chest. Horses don't spook at shadows for no reason. And out here, on land that held more stories than fences, instincts were worth more than gold. Eli stepped forward, boots crunching over dry hay, wondering what could make 3 newborns freeze like statues. A chill traced down his spine as he looked into the dim barn because something wasn't right, and what he discovered inside didn't just unsettle him. It stole the breath straight from his lungs. If you enjoy Wild West mysteries, rancher life stories, and heartwarming moments straight from the frontier, you're in the right place. Tap like, hit subscribe, and share this with someone who loves a good Western twist. It helps our channel, West Less Down, reach more folks who appreciate true frontier storytelling. The evening had settled over Eli Mercer's ranch the way a wool blanket settles across a tired horse, warm at first, then heavy, then something you hardly notice at all. It was a familiar hour, the in-between moment where daylight still clung to the ridgeline while night began crawling up from the low mesquite. Eli usually liked this part of the day. The west got quiet, almost thoughtful, as though even the land took a breath. But today, that breath felt tight, thin, wrong. The foals sensed it first. They always did. Animals are honest in ways people sometimes forget to be. Eli had raised horses long enough to know their moods the way other men know weather patterns. He didn't need a barometer. He didn't need a chart. He just watched how a horse set its ears or shifted its weight. And tonight, those 3 new foals he'd been bottle feeding for a week had frozen right at the barn threshold, huddled together like soft little statues carved from honey-colored light. "Go on," he coaxed gently, tapping the side of the door. "Your mamas are in there, and it's feedin' time." Normally, that alone would have sent them prancing inside on wobbly legs. Foals don't refuse milk. They don't hesitate when comfort is only a few steps away. But these 3 stood stiff-legged, necks stretched forward, sniffing the air like something sour drifted out of the barn. Eli frowned. Then he caught it, too. Not a smell he could name. Not exactly. More like the absence of the usual ones. The barn should have smelled of warm hay, cedar dust, leather tack, and the horse's grassy breath. That mix usually wrapped the place like a second skin. But now something tugged those scents downward, muffling them under a layer of stillness. Not silence, stillness. There's a difference. Slowly, Eli crouched beside the smallest foal, the one with the white blaze down her face. He ran a hand along her neck, feeling the quick tremor beneath her skin. "What spooked you, sweetheart?" he whispered. Her ears twitched toward the barn, then pinned back slightly. Fear, not annoyance. A foal doesn't fake fear, and that made Eli stand. He stepped toward the open doorway, boots landing soft on the dirt. The breeze behind him drifted past and into the barn, ruffling the dusty air in a slow swirl that seemed to vanish as soon as it entered the shadows. Eli's jaw tightened. He wasn't afraid. Not exactly. He'd lived through far too many rough seasons to let fear crawl that easily up his spine. But caution, that was just good ranch sense. He slid a hand to the side of the barn wall, finding the lantern hook. The old metal lamp still had half a wick and enough oil to flicker. He struck a match. The flame ignited with a soft hiss. The glow helped, but only slightly. He pushed the darkness back, but the darkness didn't retreat willingly. It felt dense, as though the barn air had thickened for a reason. Inside, nothing seemed out of place. But that, in itself, was strange. The horses were too quiet. No shifting hooves, no gentle snorts, no low rumble of a mare greeting her foal. They stood still in their stalls, heads turned toward Eli as though waiting for him to make sense of whatever was wrong. "All right," he murmured. "Let's see what you're all looking at." The foals behind him let out small wickers, then fell silent again. Eli took another step inside. The lantern light touched the stall doors, the stacked feed, the hanging halters. Everything in sight was exactly how he'd left it hours earlier. But the feeling persisted, stronger now, pushing against his senses like an unseen hand on his chest. He turned slowly, scanning the corners. Nothing moved, no rustle, no shadow shifting. But something was in here. He felt it the way you feel another person's presence in a quiet room, even before you hear them breathe.
He knelt near a patch of hay flattened into an oddly compressed shape. Not trampled flat. Slept on flat. He touched it. Still warm. Warm enough to have been occupied recently. Elk wouldn't bed down in here, he whispered to himself. Coyotes never get this far in. And no mountain lion would hide near a herd unless it was desperate. He leaned closer, bringing the lantern down to check the floorboards. Then he saw the print. Not a hoof. Not a paw. A boot. Small-sized, maybe a youth or a small-built adult. The tread was worn, the heel chipped. The print angled toward the far stall, where a heavy blanket hung unevenly, as though someone had pulled it over the rail in a hurry. Eli stood slowly. His breath expelled in a long, steady line. So that was it. Someone had been in his barn. Maybe still was. He crossed the floor with measured, quiet steps. Not sneaking, just careful. The way any seasoned rancher approaches a spooked horse or a wounded animal. Same principle, expect the unexpected. The closer he got to the far stall, the more he felt the barn air tighten. His horses shifted slightly, as if bracing for something. The foals at the door let out a collective whinny of unease. Eli reached the blanket. He paused. "Whoever's in there," he said calmly, "I ain't looking for trouble. I just need to know what you're doing on my property." No answer. He gripped the blanket's edge. Another pause. Somewhere outside, a hawk let out a sharp cry across the canyon, the kind that slices the quiet in half. It reminded Eli of something his father once told him. When the land goes silent before dark, pay attention. It's warning you, even if it can't speak your language. Eli pulled the blanket aside. The lantern glow spilled into the stall. At first, he saw nothing but tools leaning against the slats and the long shadow of the hay bin. Then he noticed the corner. A slight shift. A soft, ragged inhale. A figure was curled up behind the bin, back pressed against the boards, knees pulled tight to the chest. The person looked painfully thin, dust covering their clothes as though they crawled through half the desert to get here. One gloved hand clutched their ribs. The other shielded their face from the sudden light. "Easy," Eli said gently. "I ain't here to harm you." The figure didn't move. Then the lantern illuminated their eyes. Young. Exhausted. And filled with a fear that didn't belong to someone running from ordinary troubles. Eli felt something shift inside him, the way an old gate shifts when you open it for the first time in years. The foal's terror, the horse's silence, the warmth in the hay. It all converged into one truth. This person wasn't just hiding. They were running. And whatever they were running from might not be far behind. The lantern flame wavered as Eli steadied his breath, taking in the stranger curled behind the hay bin. Dust clung to every thread of their clothing, and their boots looked like they'd marched through hell's own gravel roads. The thinness of their frame wasn't the kind that came from skipping a meal or two. This was the kind carved by weeks of hunger, travel, and fear. Eli crouched slowly, keeping the lantern angled so its brightness didn't overwhelm them. "You hurt?" he asked, voice low, patient, the way you talk to a creature that might bolt or break. The figure flinched at the sound, then lifted their face an inch. A young woman, maybe early 20s, eyes sharp with suspicion even through her exhaustion. The kind of eyes that kept track of exits, shadows, possible threats. She didn't speak. Just tightened her grip over her ribs. Eli nodded slightly, as though she'd answered him. "All right. Let's start small. Can you stand?" Her breath caught. Not from fear. From pain. He noticed then the dark stain seeping through her jacket. Fresh. Not just dust or dirt. Blood. And it wasn't a scratch. It had that deep, slow spread that meant something inside was torn. "You've been bleeding a while," he said quietly. "You keep sitting there, you'll pass out cold." He set the lantern down gently. "I'm gonna help you up. Not because you owe me anything. Just because that's what folks should do for one another." Her eyes flicked toward the barn door. The three foals still hovered there, watching, trembling. They knew pain when they saw it. They knew danger, too. Animals in the West didn't waste energy on pretending everything was fine. The woman finally spoke, voice cracked from dryness. "Don't touch me." Eli lifted both hands. "I hear you. But standing ain't optional if you want to keep breathing. So you tell me how you'd like to do this." She tried to straighten but winced sharply, biting back a groan. Pride was fighting survival. Pride wasn't winning. Eli reached out halfway, offering but not insisting. After a few seconds, she placed her hand in his. Barely a touch. More like permission than contact. He lifted her carefully, feeling how light she was, too light. Her legs buckled. He steadied her gently. "Easy. We'll take it slow." The horses in the stalls shifted uneasily as he guided her to the center of the barn, lantern glowing between them. Shadows stretched along the rafters. The whole place felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for something neither of them could yet name. "What's your name?" he asked. She hesitated. Her throat worked. "Lena." "Well, Lena, my name's Eli. This is my land, such as it is. You've got my word, you're safe here for the moment." Her gaze darted toward the barn door again. "No place is safe for long." That line struck him harder than he expected. Folks didn't say something like that unless they'd lived it. Eli guided her to an overturned bucket and set her down gently. He grabbed a clean blanket from the tack shelf, draping it around her shoulders. She stiffened at first, but exhaustion softened her resistance. "You need water," he said. "No," she rasped. "You'll take some anyway," he replied, tone firm but not unkind. "That's the deal for staying conscious." He poured water from the small tin jug he kept in the barn for long nights. She drank with slow, deliberate sips, as though each one required permission from her body. When she finished, Eli crouched again. "Mind telling me why 3 foals refused to step through this door? They smelled your fear or your blood?" A shadow passed through her eyes. "Both. Probably both." She lifted her hand from her ribs, revealing the stain more clearly. Eli inhaled sharply. The wound wasn't jagged, it was clean, straight, and deep. A knife wound. Made by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. He frowned. "Who did this to you?" Lena shut down instantly. "You don't want part of it." "Maybe not. But you're sitting in my barn. That makes it my concern." She looked at the floor, jaw tightening. For a moment, Eli wasn't sure she'd speak again. But the barnstick silence, broken only by the horses' nervous breaths, finally nudged her. "There's a man." She paused. 2 men, actually. Brothers. They run a trading route through the border towns. Everyone knows they bend rules. I didn't realize they snapped them, too." Her hands trembled. Not from weakness. From remembering. "I saw something I shouldn't have," she continued softly. "And they gave me 2 options, silence or a shallow grave." Eli studied her carefully. She wasn't lying. People who lie look for ways to make their story neat. Hers was frayed at the edges. "You ran," he said. "I ran," she echoed. "And they followed." She nodded. "That why you're bleeding?" She hesitated. "One of them caught up." "Not for long." She swallowed. "I got lucky." Luck. Eli had seen luck before. Luck didn't carve wounds like that. Luck didn't leave a traveler crawling into a stranger's barn in the dark. "Lena," he said slowly, "are these men still tracking you?" Her answer came too quickly. "Yes." "How close?" She closed her eyes. If I made it here, they can too. Eli stood, running a hand along his jaw. The West wasn't lawless anymore, but pockets of it still answered to old rules. Men with power decided what justice meant. And some men didn't deserve that power. He crossed to the barn door and stepped out into the twilight. The horizon had thinned into a deep blue streak, the first stars pushing through like tiny needles of ice. He scanned the dirt road winding toward the ranch. Empty for now. Behind him, Lena's voice came weakly. You should tell me to leave. Why would I do that? He asked without looking back. Because if they come, they won't ask your name or give you a chance to step aside. Her breath hitched. They'll burn everything you own to smoke me out. Eli turned, leaning a shoulder against the barn frame. He studied her, this young woman who dragged herself halfway to death, yet still worried about someone else's safety. There was grit in her. The kind the Old West admired. Let me tell you something, he said. A rancher doesn't walk away from someone bleedin' in his barn. And he sure doesn't hand them over to the kind of men who put knife wounds in folks for speakin' truth. She met his eyes for the first time without flinching. You're making a mistake. Maybe, he allowed. But I've made worse mistakes for better reasons. A sudden sound cracked the night. A branch snapping. Not close. But not far enough to ignore. Eli's head snapped toward the darkness. The horses in the barn shifted. The foals cried out softly. Lena froze. Eli stepped backward into the barn, closing the door halfway, leaving just enough space to watch the night. Another crack. Footsteps. Slow. Purposeful. Heading toward the ranch. Lena's voice dropped to a whisper. They found me. Eli's fingers curled into fists. Then they found the wrong ranch. Inside the barn, the lantern flickered against the walls, casting long, uneasy shadows across the hay. Outside, the footsteps continued. Steady. Confident. Unhurried. Men who believed the night belonged to them. Eli moved toward his oldest mare's stall and reached behind the saddle rack. His hand wrapped around cold steel. The rifle slid free with a soft scrape. Lena's breath caught. You can't fight them alone. I ain't alone, Eli said calmly. I've got land that knows me, horses that trust me, and a ranch full of eyes that spotted danger before I did. The footsteps stopped. Complete silence. Eli lifted the rifle, sighted the dark road. I ain't alone, Eli said calmly. I've got land that knows me, horses that trust me, and a ranch full of eyes that spotted danger before I did. The footsteps stopped. Complete silence. Eli lifted the rifle, sighted the dark road. Then a voice cut through the cold air. Smooth. Mocking. Too familiar to Lena. Evenin' rancher. We're looking for someone who wandered onto your land. Eli didn't lower the rifle. The voice continued. We'd appreciate your cooperation. The lantern crackled behind him. Lena's breath came shallow. The foals whimpered again. Eli's jaw set like stone. Funny thing, he called back. I ain't in a cooperatin' mood. The night thickened around the barn like tar, swallowing every sound except the slow, deliberate exhale of the two men out on the road. Eli didn't need to see them clearly to know their kind. Men who moved like they owned the dark. Men who thought fear was a tool. Men who expected the world to step aside simply because they asked it to. Well, this world didn't. Not on Eli Mercer's ranch. Inside the barn, Lena sat hunched, gripping the blanket around her shoulders. Every muscle in her face tightened. She knew those voices. She'd probably heard them echo down empty alleys, across border towns, maybe even in her sleep. Eli kept the rifle tucked steady against his shoulder, his gaze sweeping the darkness beyond the barn door's crack. The faint lantern glow behind him stretched his shadow long across the floorboards, touching Lena's boots. Ranch looks quiet, the first man called out again. His tone was syrup-slow, like someone admiring a prize he believed already belonged to him. We'll just look around and be on our way. You look around my land without a skin, you'll find yourself leaking from new holes, Eli replied. Silence followed. Not surprised silence, calculating silence. The second man finally spoke. His voice was deeper, rough around the edges. "We ain't here to cause trouble, friend." "Good," Eli said. "'Cause I ain't the friendly type tonight." A faint chuckle drifted through the air. "You know who you're talking to, rancher?" "No," Eli answered. "And I'd say that's working in my favor." Lena's breath hitched. She tried to stand. Eli held out a hand without turning. "Stay," he whispered. "You move now, they'll hear it." She sank back down. Outside, the men murmured to each other. Boots shifted on gravel. The first man's voice returned, this time with the tone of someone making a final offer. "There's a girl," he said. "Stole something from us. Seen her come through?" Eli didn't blink. "A lot of folks come through these parts. I don't keep track of every boot print." "Maybe you should start," the man replied. Eli steadied the rifle. "Maybe you should leave." The second man muttered something Eli couldn't make out. The first snapped back at him. A disagreement. A small one, but enough to confirm what Eli already sensed. These two weren't here for a conversation. They were here to finish something. And Eli had stepped between them and their goal. He heard a faint click, metal sliding against metal. Someone cocking a revolver. Eli raised his voice. "I hear one more weapon leave a holster. I'll put 2 warning shots in the ground. The next ones won't be warnings." Footsteps shuffled. Another quiet argument. Finally, the lead man spoke again. "We'll be back at first light, rancher. You think real hard before then." Then the footsteps retreated. Slow. Purposeful. Still confident, but with a thin edge of irritation under each step. Eli held his breath until the sound disappeared down the road, swallowed by the dark. Only then did he lower the rifle. Inside, Lena let out a trembling breath, her hand flying to her side. Blood seeped fresh through the jacket. Eli turned sharply. "You're bleeding again." "I'm fine," she whispered. "You're not." He crossed the barn in 3 long strides, grabbed a saddle blanket and tore it into strips. She tried to wave him off, but the attempt was weak and more symbolic than anything. "Hold this," he said, pressing a folded cloth to her ribs. She obeyed, face tight with pain. Eli worked silently, cleaning the wound with what little water he had left. The injury wasn't just deep, it had been made with intent. The kind of cut that wasn't meant to incapacitate, but to warn. A message. "Lena," Eli said finally, "you need a doctor." "No," she said instantly, panic flaring. "They'll check every clinic within 50 miles. I can't be seen. Not by anyone." Eli tied the makeshift bandage securely. "Then you're staying here until I can figure something better." She looked up at him, as though trying to gauge whether he understood the consequences. "You don't owe me this." "Maybe not," he answered. "But maybe I ain't looking to live in a world where we let people bleed out in barns." Lena blinked rapidly. A moment passed where her expression softened, just a flicker, before fear reclaimed it. She swallowed. "You asked earlier what I saw. Why they're hunting me." Eli nodded but said nothing. He didn't push. A storyteller knows silence sometimes invites truth better than questions. Lena pulled the blanket tighter. "They deal in trade, yes. But they move more than goods. They move people. Girls. Boys. Families. Anyone who can't defend themselves. They smuggle them through the border towns, sell them to folks who think desperation is something they can buy." Her voice cracked, not from emotion, but from remembering details no one should ever know firsthand. "I stumbled onto one of their drop points," she said. "I didn't mean to. I was just passing through. But I heard crying. I followed it." She paused, eyes distant. "There were 6 people locked in a wagon. Hidden under tarps. Youngest couldn't have been more than 5. Eli felt a muscle twitch in his jaw. "I tried to get them out," she continued. "Didn't get far. The brothers caught me. Said I could keep quiet or stay there, permanently." "So you ran," Eli said quietly. I had to, Lena whispered. If I stayed, they'd move the captives. And no one would know where. She looked up, meeting his eyes fully for the first time. I wasn't trying to be a hero. I was just trying not to die without someone knowing the truth. Eli stepped back, resting a hand against the stall door. The horses shifted, sensing the tension. Even the barn seemed to take in the gravity of what she'd revealed. Those folks still locked up somewhere? He asked. She nodded. And those men are coming back in the morning? She nodded again. Eli inhaled slowly. Deep. Controlled. The kind of breath a man takes when he realizes the next choices he makes will write the kind of story people tell under starlight for decades. You bringin' me trouble, he said softly. I'm sorry. Don't be. Trouble finds every man eventually. He studied her. But what you brought is something else. You brought truth. The kind that needs telling. Lena's hands trembled again, from exhaustion this time. I didn't ask you to fight them. I know, Eli said. But I reckon they asked for a fight the moment they cut you. She exhaled, shaky but relieved in a way she didn't show outright. You don't understand the kind of men they are. I understand exactly, Eli replied. Men who think the West still bows to whoever shouts loudest. He stepped toward the barn door again, looking out across the land. The moon had risen now, silver washing the horizon, turning the ranch into a broad, quiet sheet of pale light. They'll come armed, Lena whispered. So will I. They're dangerous. So's a cornered horse, Eli said. But I've tamed a few. She almost smiled at that. Almost. A gust of cold wind slipped through the barn boards, brushing the lantern flame. It flickered, then steadied. Eli watched the night for a long moment, reading the land the way old ranchers read sky color before storms. Finally, he turned back to Lena. Get some rest. Dawn's bringing trouble with it. And I need a clear head if we're gonna outrun these men or face 'em. Lena nodded weakly. Her exhaustion settled over her like a weighted quilt. Eli helped her lie down on a pile of clean hay, covering her with another blanket. She drifted quickly toward sleep, pain loosening its grip just enough to allow dreams to take her. Eli stood watch. Sleep wasn't for him tonight. As the lantern's soft glow stretched across the barn, Eli Mercer knew something with absolute certainty. This wasn't just about hiding a stranger anymore. This was about right and wrong. And the men coming at sunrise had no idea what kind of fight waited for them on this ranch. The sun bled red over the far edge of the desert, flattening the mesas into black silhouettes as if the whole land were holding its breath. Dust drifted like smoke along the ridge and rolled downward into the basin where the showdown would happen. Elijah Cross tightened the reins on his stallion, Bramble, and felt the horse tremble under him. Not from fear. From anticipation. They had survived droughts, raids, starvation, and a winter so cruel it cracked stone. Now only 1 mile of dirt separated Elijah from the man who burned his ranch, stole his herd, and left him to die under the collapsed roof of his own barn. Cutter Briggs. The outlaw whose name had become a whisper across every saloon in 5 territories. Elijah scanned the basin with the practiced eye of a rancher turned warfighter. Tracks. 3 riders. Cutter never traveled alone. His gun hands, pike and redden, were somewhere ahead. The wind carried faint echoes of metal scraping metal. Maybe spurs on rock. Maybe someone cocking a rifle. The desert liked to play tricks when tensions ran high. Bramble shifted again, so Elijah leaned in and whispered for calm. Last ride, boy. After this, we head home. Home. If there was anything left to call by that name. Only blackened beams and a stone chimney still stood on that land, but Elijah had rebuilt from ashes before. He would again. He nudged Bramble forward. Sand hissed under hoofbeats as they descended the slope into the open. The basin stretched wide, a killing floor with no cover except a brittle patch of sagebrush that would barely hide a rabbit. Elijah rode straight toward the center, where the tracks converged. Cutter Briggs was already waiting. The outlaw sat atop a coal dark Mustang, hat low, bandana hanging loose like he didn't expect to break a sweat today. His long coat flapped in the dry wind. 2 rifles rested in their scabbards. His revolver hung low on his hip, silver gleaming as if freshly polished. Cutter's expression didn't show surprise. He had expected Elijah. "Elijah Cross," Cutter called out, voice echoing over the flat as Bramble slowed to a halt. "Ain't you the stubborn one? I figured you'd crawl into a grave after I lit up that pretty little spread of yours." Elijah dismounted without breaking eye contact. "You talk too much for a man at the end of his road." Cutter chuckled. "Still got that preacher tone. Shame you weren't born meaner. Could have saved yourself trouble." Elijah dropped Bramble's reins gently. The stallion stood steady. "I didn't come to talk about trouble." Cutter straightened in his saddle. "Pike. Redden." 2 shadows rose from behind a curve of rock. The henchmen leveled rifles, the barrels catching the last smear of daylight. Elijah had known they'd be here. Briggs was a coward dressed as a legend. "Elijah," Cutter called. "You're outgunned. Outnumbered. You know how this ends." Elijah turned his head slightly. From behind a distant rise, 2 figures on horseback rolled into view. A woman with a repeating rifle slung across her back. A stocky ranch hand with a double-barreled scattergun pointed skyward. Nora Pike, trail boss extraordinaire. And Big Jonah, who had stayed silent through most of their journey except when cursing the heat. Elijah didn't turn back to Cutter right away. He let Briggs sit with the realization. When the outlaw swore under his breath, Elijah finally faced him again. "You think I came alone?" Elijah said calmly. "I'm not the same man you tried to bury." Cutter spat into the dust. "Fine. Let's finish this." He snapped his fingers. "Boys." Pike and Redden fired first. Thunder cracked across the basin. Nora and Jonah answered with a 2-shot volley that forced Cutter's men to scramble for better angles. Elijah's job wasn't to trade long shots. His target was Cutter himself. Everything else was noise. Elijah drew his revolver, thumbed the hammer back, and fired in one fluid motion. Cutter jerked in his saddle as the bullet clipped his coat and ripped a line across his ribs. He snarled and returned fire, the muzzle flashed bright as a sparkler in the dying light. Elijah ducked, rolled, kicked up dust, and came up running. Cutter's Mustang reared as Elijah closed the distance. The outlaw steadied, cursed, and leaped off the horse to fight on foot. He yanked a second revolver from behind his belt. Rounds ripped past Elijah's boots, sending plumes of dust upward like small explosions. He kept running. Closer. Closer. Until he could almost see the twitch in Cutter's jaw. They fired at the same time. Elijah's shoulder roared with pain, but he stayed upright. Cutter stumbled backward, clutching his side with one hand while trying to reload with the other. Elijah saw the opening. He charged. Cutter's final bullet snapped past Elijah's ear. Before the outlaw could cock the hammer again, Elijah tackled him. They crashed into the dirt, fists swinging, boots kicking. Cutter slammed an elbow into Elijah's bruised ribs. Elijah replied with a punch that cracked against Cutter's jaw. Sand sprayed around them as they grappled like wild animals. Cutter managed to draw a knife from his boot. The blade flashed. Elijah twisted, grabbed Cutter's wrist, and forced it downward. Muscles strained. Blood from Elijah's shoulder dripped onto Cutter's collar. Cutter's teeth were bared in a manic grin as the blade crept closer to Elijah's throat. A single gunshot echoed like a cannon. Cutter gasped. His grip loosened. The knife fell, clattering against the rock. The outlaw looked down at the red blooming across his chest. Behind Elijah, Nora lowered her rifle. "You're welcome," she said without triumph. "Only weariness." Elijah rolled off Cutter, breathing heavy. Cutter coughed, a wet rattle. "You think this makes you righteous?" His voice was thin but defiant. "You think killing me fixes anything?" Elijah's expression didn't shift. "No. But it stops you from burning anyone else's life down." Cutter tried to laugh, but it dissolved into choking. His hand twitched once, then went still. The desert quieted. Even the wind seemed to settle. Jonah joined them, shotgun on his shoulder. Hell of a fight, Jonah said. Thought he had you for a minute. Elijah stood slowly. He almost did. Bramble trotted over, snorting softly. Elijah rested a hand against the stallion's warm neck. Nora approached with a strip of cloth to bind his shoulder. Home? She asked. Elijah nodded. Home. They began the long ride back as the final slice of sun dipped beneath the horizon. Smoke no longer rose from the ruins of Elijah's ranch. The land waited, patient and faithful. He would rebuild. Not out of vengeance. Not out of stubborn pride. But because the West belonged to those who stood up after the world tried to break them. Elijah Cross rode forward, leaving the Basin and the corpse of Cutter Briggs behind. The night wrapped around him, cool and quiet. A new beginning in the rugged silence of a land that tested every soul, yet rewarded those who endured. And Elijah endured.